Yes.
Dr. Entwistle, I've got a handful of questions to ask you on different topics from core participants and their legal representatives. You gave some evidence about having informal discussions with clinical colleagues in local hospitals. And the question is whether during those discussions or otherwise you discuss the need to minimise the use of blood or blood products, given your awareness of the unavoidable risk that they carry.
I don't think we specifically discussed that, but I think one of the take-home messages which I try to convey is that transfusion, just like any other medical intervention, is a form of treatment which may have risks, maybe small, maybe big. Whatever those risks are, the clinician using transfusion should do so bearing in mind the need and the possible alternatives that could be used. But the need, bearing in mind the risks.
We looked at a document which referred to you making a visit to New Orleans. Did you visit any blood banks when you were in America?
No, I didn't, because I was privileged to have a very brief visit to go to the American Association of Blood Banks meeting, and it didn't allow me time to divert onto local blood banks, which would have been very interesting, yes, I've no doubt, but I just didn't have the time to do that, I'm afraid.
Now, I've been asked to ask you a question about the arrangements with BPL for pro rata, whether or not you got back a pro rata amount for the plasma that you provided. Now, if you want, I've got a couple of documents I can take you to prompt your memory about that, unless you are able to answer it without going to documents.
Well, I think I can. At one stage, in the early 80s, we were a bit behind in terms of what we were required to produce, but from about mid-80s onwards, we had no problem. We were well on track.
Can I will in fact, I think, take you to a couple of documents just to make sure that we've got the full picture. The first one is CBLA 301380. So this is a letter from, if we go over to the second page, it's from Dr. Lane to you, dated the 12th of June 1981. And if we go back to the first page, Dr. Lane says, as you know, Oxford and Wessex are the only regions that do not appear on the pro rata league table for factor 8 supply. The reason being that all Oxford plasma and half Wessex plasma is fractionated at PFL, and the system of fractionation vis-a-vis data collection does not appear to correspond with that at BPL. And then if we go down to the big paragraph starting, I've requested that Oxford plasma and Wessex plasma be brought into line with other regions. And then he sets out the advantages and disadvantages of that and the arguments. And then if we go over the page, he concludes by saying, the argument's either way, sorry, concludes by saying, removing this final irregularity, I think he means there by Oxford and Wessex not being involved in the pro rata system, will not create difficulties, but in the long run is a much better guarantee of improved service and supply of factor 8 to Oxford and Wessex than at present. I hope to obtain your agreement with the points set out in this letter and would ask you to obtain mutual agreement on these matters with Dr. Ritzer at the Oxford Haemophilia Centre. And then if we go over if we look then at CBLA 301389, we can see your reply, which is the 23rd of June 1981. And you say, thank you for your letter of 12th June. I set up a meeting yesterday with Ethel Bidwell, Jim Smith, Terry Snape, Dr. Ritzer and myself to discuss this whole matter. We all agree that the proposed new arrangements are probably not a great deal more than a paper exercise in terms of accounting for what goes where. It appears that the practices relating to distribution will remain unchanged and that any factor rate produced either at PFL or Elstree from Oxford material will continue to be issued direct to the Oxford Haemophilia Centre. We are satisfied that it would be proper for the Oxford Centre to come in line with the others, and it is right that we should contribute to the Lord Mayor Trelaw School. We also appreciate the advantages of Oxford production being buffered in the event of unforeseen hiccups with their batches. And then you say at the next paragraph, one point I think should not be forgotten is that about half of the patients that come to the Oxford Haemophilia Centre are referred from outside this region, and this very often is because they are the more difficult cases to deal with. This point will not be lost when I put my next submission to the RHA for funds to increase our plasma collection. So is it right to understand that prior to this exchange of correspondence, you weren't in the pro rata system, but following this exchange of correspondence, Oxford was brought into line with the other regional transfusion centres?
Yes, that was my understanding. And I think this was largely a historical phenomenon in that, of course, the Churchill Hospital is also the location of where the Oxford Haemophilia Centre is. And that's how PFL got involved with that in the first place. As time went by and the demand for products went up and up and up, PFL could no longer cope anyway, and BPL had to assume the fractionation for everybody. So in fact, the redistribution was actually simplified.
Were you aware that Professor Contreras in the Edgware Centre had a supplemental, a leaflet that was supplemental to the nationally agreed material provided to donors, a supplemental questionnaire which donors could fill in confidentially to identify whether or not they were in high-risk groups? Is that something that was brought to your attention?
Not that I can recall, no. And was she the only one to have that?
The evidence that she gave last week was that that was something that she and Dr. Barbara came up with after visiting America, and that was something that they instituted in the Edgware Centre. I don't think she gave any evidence about whether or not that was put in place in other centres. That's not something you were aware of?
No.
And you asked questions this morning about the donation sessions undertaken with military personnel, and you said that they were extremely beneficial. I've been asked to ask you what you meant by that.
Well, normally we reckon to have about 100 to 120 donors at a session. One particular one at a military establishment, they rang up during the course of the morning, could we keep going over lunchtime? All right, if you must. We finished up with 240 odd donations that day, which was, well, all I can say is that the staff concerned were brilliant.
So those are all the questions I'm going to ask from core participants and their legal representatives. Do you have?
I have none of my own.
Dr. Entwistle, is there anything that you would like to say at this stage?
Yes, if I may. Firstly, can I say what a tremendous amount of work, Katie Scott, you and your colleagues must have done to sort out all these documents. You've done a tremendous job, and coming from a non-transfusion background, I think you ought to be congratulated. And I think that is all I have to say. But thank you all very much for your attention, and I wish you well with whatever the outcome may be.
Well, thank you from my perspective, and my congratulations to you, if I may, for the careful way you've given your evidence. You've given clearly evidence which, when you've been asked a question, you have actually thought about the answer in order to try and get it right. And that gives one confidence that you are telling us what you know and what you don't know, as best you now recollect it, and given us the insight you have into the position that the Oxford Centre took, that is the Transfusion Centre, and it's slight remove from the Oxford Haemophilia Centre, which got its supplies elsewhere. But thank you for that, and also for giving us another view on when a director of a regional transfusion centre first knew of the various particular challenges to blood. It was a fascinating account, in particular, to listen to how you had, in effect, been the first person in our blood transfusion system to start a test for hepatitis B. It's a pity that you didn't have, or it's perhaps a credit to you that you had the humility not to claim rather more forcefully than you did the credit for that. But thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Tomorrow, sir, we have the evidence of Dr. Galea.
Yes, so tomorrow, 10 o'clock, Dr. Galea.